Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another video. We're going to be going over.
Wait, I'm asking you questions.
Is it now?
Yeah.
About.
Yeah, so Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to Sabur's channel. This is your brother Hamza Tzortzis. So I'm going to ask Sabur a bunch of questions on a very specific, interesting framing argument concerning the design argument. So there are various contentions from the atheist community, scientific atheist community, if you like Dawkins and others, concerning the design argument. And you have an interesting approach on showing their kind of intellectual double standards in a way, or you present a kind of intellectual dilemma for them. If they accept one, they have to accept the other. If they reject one, they have to reject the other. So explain, what is the problem and how you're solving it?
So one way of looking at it is going back to when Dawkins was being asked, how do you prove the scientific method? And he was with Stephen Law, and one of the audience members put this to him, and his answer was, well, if you base computers on science, they work. If you base this, medicine, it works, bitches, right? That was his way of basically explaining it. Now, Stephen Law sitting next to him was, a bit embarrassed by that answer, and I think he said something like, that's induction. And I actually asked him...
Or secular reasoning.
Yes, yeah. So... I actually asked him about this, and this is clear that it doesn't make sense philosophically, but who cares if it makes sense philosophically? It made the audience laugh, right? So let's take what Dawkins has said and apply it. Like, this is one of my things that I love about your debates. You simply take the arguments of the opponent, you don't challenge the structure of the argument, you simply change the variables. So let's change the variables. If something works, therefore it's true. That's his argument. Okay. Well, let's change that for the concepts of purpose, the concepts of design, these particular concepts which are being used in biology. Now, in River Out of Eden, Dawkins basically says that design and purpose are useful and good working tools for scientists. Now, his opponent, Dennis Noble, also says the same thing, that purpose is a good research heuristic. So this is clear within the biological community. In fact, the late Michael Roos, he has a book on purpose as well. So it's clear, it's a consensus that you need functionality, design, purpose as good research tools. So if that particular research heuristic has led to fruitful science and us coming to conclusions we wouldn't have come to otherwise, then it works. If it works, then it must be true. So if we take his argument that he was making with Stephen Law and we were to apply it to biological systems, then he would have to be consistent and say design is true because it works.
Very good. There's nothing else to say. I wonder if he's going to comment on that.
Yeah.
That's very good.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, it's just one of those things I was thinking
Which
about.
is interesting, because I remember when I was doing biology A-level way back, this is over like 24 years ago, or 25, 26 years ago or something. And if I remember correctly, our biology teacher was saying about structure and function, right? Things have a particular biological structure that's in line with the function.
Yeah.
So, which is very interesting. Yeah.
Which, by the way, is one of the reasons why there was a whole controversy about junk DNA. So the genome, it was considered mostly junk. A lot of scientists said, this is junk. And even one particular philosopher, Philip Kitcher, he said something really absurd. He said, most of the human genome is junk, so God needs to go back to school, right? Now, interestingly, this is really interesting. There was a discussion after, in 2012, with the ENCODE study, the DNA Encyclopedia, they discovered that most 80% of the genome is actually functional. It actually does something. That non-coding part plays a role in gene expression and other things. And there was a treasure trove of data that they basically discovered, which was going to help in terms of disease and all these types of things in medicine. So it was clear it's no longer junk, right? Now, when Richard Dawkins was asked about this by a former chief rabbi of the UK, Jonathan Sacks, in a debate, and Jonathan Sacks says, well, we used to be told that, it's junk, and now we found that it's no longer junk. And remember, the Darwinists were previously saying natural selection led to all this garbage being stuck in the body, right? It's all our evolutionary history. And then Dawkins says, well, of course natural selection would get rid of the junk and would keep these things functional. So he actually gave the exact reverse answer. So in terms of junk DNA, we have a live example where the design heuristic is not only helpful, it actually leads to a astronomical increase in terms of the new data that we have discovered about how the body works. Okay, so if we were to apply this, right, this structure and function, and we were to apply this throughout our lives, we cannot live without design. We cannot live without purpose. We cannot live without these things. But the other thing which I wanted to put to you is this. One of the things that you must have noted during many of your debates is the standard rejections of the design inference based upon common themes, like there is no frame of reference. You can see a mobile phone being designed in a factory, but we haven't seen universe makers making universes. Or they would say something like, this design is poor, this could have been optimized. Now there's two things. Bad design, good design is based on purpose, right? So if you walk past a building, the building has collapsed, you can say it's bad design. But if the building was designed for 100 years, you're walking after 1,000 years, then it's not. However, there's something I was thinking about. When Francis Crick, in his book Life Itself, was speaking about this theory of directed panspermia to explain the origin of life, because life is so incredibly complex when you go down to the molecular level, the first cells are way more complex than what anybody could have imagined.
So they came out from space.
From space, from another civilization. When he came up with that theory, he was making a design inference.
Yes.
And he didn't say, well, it's poor design. He didn't say we didn't see designers making this. And when Dawkins was asked the same question in an interview and he was pushed about the first life, he said the same thing. Now, the first thing I want to put to you, Hamza, is he didn't say the standard contention that we hear when we use the design argument, but who designed the designer? He didn't say it's poor design, and he didn't make any of those common objections.
Yeah, because it's like almost a God replacement. They know they have to provide some kind of answer, yeah? But also, even the two contentions are false anyway. You don't need a frame of reference to infer design. I don't think I've ever seen a phone being designed before. Just because I haven't seen the first phone being designed or a phone being designed, that I'm not allowed to make the inference that this phone is designed. That's complete nonsense.
And
sorry to say.
It is. And
like, for example, the first time I saw, when someone writes things in the sand, like I love you, or please marry me, or whatever the case may be. I've never seen someone do it, but the first time I saw it in the sand, I'm not going to say, oh, that happened because of the waves, yeah? Say, no, someone actually did it, right? So that's not a very strong contention, first and foremost, right?
And
we say it's designed because there's something about it that we could infer that it was designed. Not necessarily that we have a history of things being designed that look like that. You said they've got it the way around. The other thing is, what was the other contention that you mentioned that they say?
So who designed the design?
No, there was another one that you said. There's the frame of reference, and the other one was perfection.
Yeah.
Well, you can only assess if something is not well designed if you know its purpose.
Yeah.
So are you agreeing that it has a purpose? And that would open another can of worms for them anyway in the first place. So this is a very ridiculous, it's a Christopher Hitchens type of argument. It sounds strong rhetorically, but when you scratch the intellectual surface, it's complete nonsense, right? Because do you know its purpose? Like, oh, the human being, we die and we decay. Well, yeah, because that's our purpose. Well, our purpose is not to live forever. Our purpose is to have experience the vicissitudes of life, because life, as Allah says in the Quran, that Allah created death and life in order for you to be tested. So these things are tests, and if we react to these life experiences, whether it's our decaying, getting old, physical problems and so on and so forth, we react to them in a way that is pleasing to Allah. That's worship, right? And we pass the test, and we are eligible for divine eternal mercy in paradise. So the point is, they have to assume a particular purpose for it, right? And so those two approaches are completely false anyway. But what's interesting, what you've done is you've exposed their double standards. Why is it the case that you have these two key contentions when it comes to when theists talk about there is a designer for the cosmos, but when you talk about a design, an explanation for our design, which is an alien civilization, you don't bring those two contingents
Or
in.
the aliens are poor designers.
Yeah.
Or we haven't seen the aliens designing, right? And where we started off was the research heuristic of design, right? That being so useful. That as a argument, taking Dawkins' argument of science works, therefore it's true, that would be valid if we were to accept what he's saying, even if these contentions were never addressed. So these are independent things. So this is one of the things that you used to say many, many years ago. It's not really about the arguments. I was watching a discussion between...
Yeah, because they have non-negotiable philosophical and even maybe emotional or psychological commitments. So it becomes a lens for them, and that's how they see reality. And then what we try and do is show that lens basically ends up in inconsistencies. Because I always have this view that rejection of truth, kufr, always contradicts itself.
Yes.
And you see that a lot. It always contradicts itself. Why is it okay for this and it's not okay for that, right? Like even, for example, in consciousness, bro, they have this thing called panpsychism, and there's different forms of panpsychism, which I really believe is a good replacement. And it has so many questions that it raises, you know, like one form of panpsychism, that they believe that everything has proto-consciousness, as an electron that has a form of...
Which Michael Roos, by the way, he was flirting with that idea.
Yeah, for sure. So the thing is, why even think of it? Because... you know, they would argue that all electrons, or you know, the constituents of physical reality have a form of proto-consciousness, and it comes together to have this unified consciousness. And a key contingent in that is, well, how can we have a unified consciousness when it's based on all these proto-consciousnesses? The point, and that's called and that's a big problem for one form of panpsychism. But the issue is there's so many questions concerning panpsychism, but when you bring the theistic approach, or say theistic dualism, whatever the case may be, it has less philosophical questions, but they want to entertain this because we live in a secular world.
And it's complete, as in dualistic integrative approach actually explains everything from bottom up, right?
Yeah. So it's a more coherent approach, and we've discussed that very briefly in another video. But the point is, the reason they do that is because they have non-negotiable secular assumptions.
Yeah.
Like there was a book by a Christian philosopher, I think J.P. Moreland, on consciousness, was published by Routledge, I believe. And towards the end, he talks about one of the academics in the philosophy of the mind sitting at a dinner table, like concerning the hard problem of consciousness, and saying, you know, maybe a theistic explanation is a good explanation. Even at the dinner table, that person was shunned. So I think J.P. Moreland, who was basically saying that, you know, there are some inherent biases in the secular academy. Yeah, I even had this when I think I was doing my MA in philosophy, when we were talking about our ability to have rational insights and how evolution actually doesn't. And I gave them an example of that, because it's not about truth; it's about survival and so on and so forth. He basically shunned me. In the academic space, because you know, when you do a postgrad, you have a lot of seminars that you have discussions and debates, and I'm like, whoa, that's interesting. We're challenging, you know, the church.
Holy cow.
We're challenging the holy cow. So we need to show and expose that a lot of these things are essentially God replacements. So panspermia, bro. There's some alien civilization that put like a mitochondrion or a cell on a meteorite and, you know, brought it down on Earth.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, man.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting, and this is what I love about the area.
And then what created that civilization?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's do the infinite regress.
Infinite regress, right? And when he was actually asked what created that civilization, he said they must have come around by some Darwinian process. But then it goes back to the same thing.
Well, then you have the same problem.
Yeah. So one of the... I didn't actually ask you this in the previous interviews that we did about consciousness, but I wanted to ask you about this because one of the examples that I've seen they use is the example of a radio, right? So what they're basically saying is, well, when you switch on the radio and you're listening to the news, you're hearing all that noise and all the stuff that's basically happening. It's not coming from the radio. It's the radio waves which are all around us. So what they're basically saying is that the brain evolved to the level of being a radio, and there was always this prototype of consciousness, and the brain simply has the ability to, just like you switch on the radio, it amplifies what's already there. At first pass, what are your thoughts on these type of examples that they use to try and explain away?
I don't know, I haven't heard this one before, but I would say, well, but yeah, then where did the radio waves come from? The radio, you're assuming the radio waves, it's a false analogy, because the radio waves are not a source of the news. Yeah, because someone is talking, right? Say I'm a news, I don't know, say it's BBC Radio 4 or something, or LBC, right? And I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be talking about today's news, Trump's inauguration, this, that, the other. That's the source of the news, right? And then it goes into the microphone or whatever the technology is, then the radio waves go out there, right? And radios pick it up. So they're basically saying they're saying the middleman is the cause. That's a big problem. It doesn't make sense. Or maybe they're just saying, well, this is an example of how it works. So consciousness pervades the whole universe, right? And what we are, the human brain or consciousness itself, the individual conscious being, just takes from this, consciousness that pervades the whole universe, and we basically express that consciousness through thoughts, feelings, subjectivity, etc. So yeah, that could potentially work. But does it work ontologically? No, because then you just say, well, where did this consciousness come from? And then they would have to explain, how does this consciousness that is pervading the whole universe actually enables a individual conscious entity to have individual subjective conscious experiences. And then what they do, they raise so many different questions now. Then why are you rejecting dualism then? Because dualism has less problems. So why would you? Because the only problem the only problem that dualism has is basically, I forgot it's called the problem of I forgot what it's called, but basically how does
the link the physical
causal link between the physical and non-physical.
Yeah.
But in this approach, you have far more problems. So why are you rejecting dualism?
Yeah.
Do you see my point? Because they want I think it's maybe a secular inherent assumption that they never want anything that is in line with theism.
Yeah, you've just raised a really interesting point, which is the contention against dualism is what's the mechanism between the physical and the non-physical aspect of consciousness, right? But then the same problem applies to the entire universe then. But what if they were to make a particular argument that at the beginning of the universe, we had the start of space, time, matter, and consciousness. We're just going to leave it. We're just going to, backdate the problem to that point and just assume.
Okay, so these are coming. This is like the first time I'm hearing this stuff in a way. So intuitively, they would say, okay, let's take that. Let's accept your position.
Yeah, give us the first miracle. We'll explain the rest.
So is that consciousness eternal?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it have an ability to produce other consciousness? Yeah. Is this consciousness in some way knowledgeable? Yeah. Does this consciousness have a will? Because if this consciousness is able to basically produce other consciousnesses, if you like, then one would argue maybe it has some form of a will, right? So it's eternal.
It gets worse.
It's eternal. Is this consciousness one? Yeah. Is it one consciousness? Yeah. All right. So what are you really doing? Really, you're just describing Allah or God, right? So that's my point. So just okay, fine. So what is just the framing of the language? So you believe in the beginning was this consciousness. All right. Well, let's just do conceptual analysis, or let's rationalize this. In order for that to even work, what does it mean about this consciousness? It must be powerful, or it must have, it must be knowing, it must be one, it must have a will, it must be eternal.
It must be creative because we're creative.
Yeah, exactly. So from that perspective, do you see my point?
Yeah.
So it must be able to produce conscious human beings. So if that is the case, then what are you really describing? Yeah, so I mean, we'd have to think about it more. There's my intuitive responses, but a lot of the responses are just really God replacements, bro. And it's a shame because, when academics use particular language, especially in the philosophy of the mind, they use very, very technical language sometimes. They're very it's very hard to access their work. Yeah, it's like almost they deliberately write in a way to be misunderstood or not to be understood. Yeah. And but when you start to understand the literature, you're like, but what are they really saying? It's just really a God replacement, and that's why we need more of our thinkers, our academics, to get involved in these important areas of work, AI, consciousness, and actually provide a paradigm or a worldview or a perspective that actually is more in line with the Quran and the Sunnah, the Islamic paradigm, the Islamic worldview. Because sometimes, unfortunately, what a lot of our, and I've said this before, academics do who have theistic Islamic inclinations, or the practicing Muslims, because of the hegemony of the academic secular space or inferiority complex or social psychological perspectives, that we have a need to belong and need to feel certain, and sometimes we go to the dominant group for that belonging and for that certainty. We get consumed by the dominance of the secular academic space, and we need more brave people. You don't have to adopt panpsychism just because it's a trend. Like, come on, man. Just produce our own worldview from the ground up, from the Quran and Sunnah up. And if it rejects panpsychism, then so be it. There are a lot of holes and problems with panpsychism. Even the panpsychists are debating these issues and say that there's problems. What is our solution on this issue?
Yep.
Is it integrative dualism? Is it another approach? But the point is, ask that question from the ground up. Don't be consumed by these alien academic paradigms.
Yeah.
And you can see it in the literature, actually. And it's a form of an inferiority complex, and we need to be brave and say, no, our role is, what's the point of being academic and getting involved in this?
Or as Shabir Akhtar said,
yeah, may Allah have mercy on him, he said, what's the point of being intellectual if you're going to be a coward? So let's be a bit more brave and try to address these issues. You don't have to please anyone just because you're using their paradigm.
Yeah.
They're going to change they've changed their paradigm so many times on these issues anyway, and there are interminable debates on this issue, as Christopher Koch says. Yeah. So let's provide our solution, and I think it's going to be a more coherent solution, and people are going to start to adopt it.
Absolutely.
And then debate it, and then discuss it, obviously with hikmah and with good manners, but bring it out into the public discourse.
Sure. Last question to you before we end. Dawkins calls consciousness the final frontier. Wouldn't you say it's more correctly described as the first frontier? Because it's the first experience we have. And it, when you make an argument from contingency or design or the ontological argument, the moral argument, it can be abstract, but consciousness is something we feel. So it's we're thinking about something. It's the experience which cannot be denied, right? So don't you think in the dawah, it's not like a side argument. It should be the front and center argument that we use.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I used to do this quite a lot, maybe 10 years ago now. I had debates on consciousness.
Peter Simmons?
Yeah, I was writing about this, and obviously my ideas evolved, and I've done in-depth seminars for Sapiens and blogging theology on AI, and does it undermine religion, and so I've wanted to push it, and I'm happy that you're doing it, and you should take it even further, because it is the beginning and the end, in a way, because at the end of the day, you have inner subjective conscious experiences, which really makes up which really is a key aspect of what it means to be human, and you have that before you even know any science.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's important because it's so. And I remember I wrote this in my book, The Divine Reality, and I mentioned a story about my dad. He was in Hyde Park once, Speaker's Corner. And then he basically, I think, was dealing with an atheist or something. And then my dad, I forgot the story now, but basically my dad said
denying
something.
yourself.
Denying yourself is like denying God, right?
Yeah,
because you have, and that really evoked within me the kind of understanding of, well, that's actually true, because if you deny in God, you deny yourself. You deny yourself, you deny God, because what does it mean to be you? And what it means to be you, there are many things, and one part of that is that you have inner subjective conscious states. You have this phenomenological quality to you, meaning a inner subjective consciousness. And what we would argue is, well, how do we explain that? You can't explain it through physicalism or non-theistic, non-physicalist approaches. The best approach, I think, is a theistic approach. And we should, and this links to AI as well, because it's such an important topic, because it links to AI. Because if you have a physicalist ontology worldview, you're going to end up thinking AI is like can be fully human and fully consciousness, right? And that would deny, God as an explanation for consciousness.
That's a very important link.
Of course, it's a very important link. It's the same thing, and that's why consciousness is the beginning and the end of our discussions right now. Because you remember, and if you want to broaden the kind of idea, all types of knowledge is really self-knowledge. Yeah, actually, Bruce Lee said that, because it's quite deep. But let's unpack it a little bit. We are the filter in which knowledge comes through, isn't it? Yeah. So the human psychological, spiritual, or consciousness aspect of who we are is actually quite critical. But because we have secularized and materialized the human, we think when we have data, we accept it, we make the best conclusions because we're abstract, rational human beings, and we move forward. It doesn't work that way, because you have a filter. The filter is you, your personality, and that's why you have two different scientists with the same data making different conclusions. Do you see my point? Why is that the case?
Well-
it's because there may be something else going on, some philosophical or internal or conscious or spiritual or psycho-spiritual filters that's making them lead towards one conclusion over another. Maybe this may not be directly related, but it's another important thing to bring into that, because in the academic space we treat sometimes scientists and academics as the new priests, the priests, the religion of the white coats. Yeah, these are Moses tablets because it's scientific data and it's this. But when you study philosophy of science, it's not the case. You have theory ladenness, for example. You have all of these problems because we are human beings with consciousness and with our own limitations and with our own internal filters.
Yeah.
But anyway, the point is, AI consciousness, it's going to be the big thing.
So yeah, just on this point, I wanted to, you said we can come up with many different ideas based upon our values or how we see the world. This is something I discussed with Lawrence Kuhn about consciousness, and he said this in his paper. Not in his paper, he said it in another place. But what he basically said, and he was keying off what others have said, is that in science you have this idea of narrowing down theories. But in consciousness, it seems to be an astronomical increase in the number of theories, right? And he covers many different perspectives, and then he goes into the theological. But don't you think that reason for the amount of increase in these types of theories is because that is dependent upon where you begin? Whether you're a theist, an atheist, an agnostic, a materialist, a non-materialist, non-reductive materialist, or whatever it is. That's why with consciousness, we're just seeing an increase.
Yeah, agreed. And that's why many atheists, sometimes when you address this issue, they have to bite the bullet sometimes. And you say to them, okay, so if you are just called physical processes, or you could be reduced to, in some way, to cold, blind, non-conscious physical processes, then that opens another can of worms concerning what? Value.
Love. What's love?
Yeah, do you have ultimate value? You're no different from a
chocolate bunny.
6-foot chocolate bunny and yourself. So hacking away at the chocolate bunny is scientifically equivalent to hacking away at the human.
It's rearrangement of atoms.
It's a rearrangement of atoms. So there are other cans of worms, and that's why.
But don't you think that's interesting? Because the champions of human rights, the people right at the forefront of we have to make a better world, the humanist.
It's all ego.
Yeah.
It's all sentimentalism. Because Jeremy Bentham said it's human rights with that kind of God or that kind of grounding is nonsense on stilts.
Yeah.
It is nonsense on stilts. Because at the end of the day, you can't have your cake and eat it. Yeah, we could be sentimental about it. Oh, Hamza, the chocolate bunny doesn't have feelings like you. The chocolate bunny doesn't have emotions. They're not human. They don't have a soul, or they don't have blah, 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 creativity. But what does that mean according to your worldview? Soul, pain, creativity, consciousness, humanity is just reduced to neurochemical firings in your brain that's further reduced to random electrons whizzing around.
It's a form of human exceptionalism.
Yeah, of
we're
course
better.
it is.
How are we better? We
Of
actually
course
have
it
no
is.
reason to think we're better.
Yeah, but even ontologically, it doesn't make sense, and that's why you have to have a good ontology to affect your ethics. It affects your ethics. It affects your epistemology. Because when you study worldviews, bro, ontology is not separate from epistemology. For example, we believe a source of knowledge is revelation, because our ontology is that we believe in a God. But listen to this. They reject God. That's why they reject revelation. It affects their epistemology.
Right.
It also affects your ethics and your meta-ethics.
Yeah.
Because if your ontology is we're blind physical processes, or we're based on physical processes in some way which are blind, non-conscious, it's going to affect your ethics.
Yeah.
Yes, you're going to try and find ways on how to live a good life because of pain and pleasure, all of that stuff. But ontologically speaking, it's reduced to random, blind, cold, physical process whizzing around. So why should I accept it? It has no ultimate value.
You know what you're
It's also, bro, it's called sentimentalism.
It is.
The atheist project, when they try to revive things like human rights and the universal and human value, human dignity,
Categorical.
is all sentimentalism. Because if you're true to your own ontology, you should shut your mouth. You should. Because you're fundamentally blind, cold, non-conscious, physical stuff. Simple as that.
Determined, because if you are telling me about human rights or to change my behavior in a particular way, you are assuming I have a consciousness which is independent of all of the physical, so I can make the choice to become a better person. But you can't. And you know what you're saying? It really resonated with something I remembered Numan Ali Khan said, right? It was really interesting during one of his tafsir sessions. He said, the idea that the universe is random and, basically all of this just came together by itself, that randomness then travels to the human domain and the moral domain. and then everything basically becomes subjective. So it's so interesting, the link between the ontological and the ethical is not usually made, but the way that you've actually explained it, they are necessarily linked. There's no way of escaping the two.
No. Even philosophers today, they don't say that your ontology is distinct from your epistemology. It's linked, and even your ethics is linked to your epistemology, because ethics, how to live a good life. Forget meta ethics. Talk about ethics itself. The secular normative ethical theories like utilitarianism and ethical egoism and deontological ethics and so on and so forth. These things are affected by your epistemology and ontology. Why? Because they're secular. They won't say revelation is a source of morality. Why? Because of the epistemology, they don't believe it's a valid source of knowledge. Okay, why? Because they believe in a physicalist world. Do you see? So it's all links. So your ethics is impacted by your epistemology is impacted by your ontology, the source and nature of reality. So if you have a particular understanding of the source and nature of reality, then it would affect what are the sources of knowledge. It would also affect your ethics.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's why, just to end, that's why it's important for us to understand worldviews, because Islam is a deen, it's a worldview. But if you understand Islam as like a post-secular religion, then you're going to try and fit Islam into these paradigms, which is very problematic. But if you understand that Islam is a worldview, like other worldviews, secularism, modernity, liberalism, whatever the case may be, then you know that worldviews address domains of inquiry. And those domains of inquiry is what is the source of nature reality, ontology. What is knowledge? What is truth? What is the source of knowledge? What is the source of truth? Epistemology. What is right and wrong? Ethics. What is the human? Which you could talk about, anthropology maybe. And it addresses those domains. And everyone has a worldview, either implicitly or explicitly, because they answer these questions in some way based on a particular paradigm. Islam is a paradigm, is a worldview that addresses ontology, epistemology, ethics, and maybe some overlaps, but it's very distinct and unique. And that's how you should understand Islam. It is a way of life, a worldview. It is the correct lenses that allows you to see reality as it is. Other worldviews are skewed lenses that are blurred and fuzzy or dirty, that do not allow you to see reality as it is, because they have their certain answers concerning epistemology, ontology, and so on and so forth that are not correct. And that's very important to address, because Islam has its own worldview. And once you understand Islam that way, when a lot of things come to you, whether it's to do with ethics, whether it's to do with my body, my choice, and people get affected by it sometimes. Oh yeah, that's true. It is my body, it is my choice. No, but that has a worldview perspective, which has its own questions concerning particular domains of inquiry, such as ontologically, they don't believe that your body was created by God and that God actually owns your body, right? But that's what we believe. So our ontology is completely different. So it would affect their ethics, right? Because they think I could do what I want with it because I own it. No, you've adopted a wrong assumption based on a false worldview. Our worldview is that actually the ontology, the source and nature of reality, is that God created us and God owns us. He's the master, he's the Rabb, he's the master, owner, sustainer, maintainer of the entire universe, including ourselves. Therefore, it doesn't follow that we have a right to do whatever we want.
Absolutely.
Do you see my point? So these kind of like subtleties are important. Like even when it comes to things like, what do you call it? I can do what I want as long as it doesn't harm anyone. That some people get affected by this. Yeah, it's true. Leave him alone. He's not harming anyone. Just Islam is your own private thing, and as long as it doesn't harm anyone, leave it alone. Okay, well, what does that assume? Well, that assumes modernity or liberalism to be true, because they have, generally speaking, a particular ethic, which is utilitarianism, right? As long as you increase the happiness of the collective, and you decrease the harm, then it's a good thing to do. If you increase the harm, then it's a bad thing to do. So as long as you're not harming anyone, leave them alone, right? But that assumes utilitarianism to be true, which is an ethic of liberalism, if you like, or modernity. We believe in divine commands. So it's not about, and not just that, we have our own understanding what harm means, because they have a ontological commitment, which they say this world is all that there is, right? Therefore, the ethical paradigm will only be dealing with the dunya. But our ontology is we believe in the dunya and the akhirah.
Absolutely.
So therefore, it may not be harmful, inverted commas, in the dunya, but it might be in the akhirah. It might have spiritual harm, which they won't address because it's affected by their ontological commitments. Do you see how everything connects?
Absolutely. And not
actually, we should do a separate video on worldviews.
No, we should. And when you were talking about this, I was thinking it undermines truth, because if it's about maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain, where's the truth in that? Because you could create a society based upon falsehoods. Okay, so we believe in human rights. By the way, don't tell anybody they don't exist ontologically. We can't justify them, because then we'll have a miserable world. We'll have an increase in pain. So what's interesting is the garb of truth is used like we're all about truth and rationality. But when it comes to these types of things, there's a direct contradiction between the two.
Yeah, of course. Which was one of the challenges to utilitarianism anyway, which we can unpack another time. But I think there was a famous statement by one of the utilitarian original thinkers when he said, "I'd rather be a unsatisfied Socrates than a satisfied pig." Yeah. I think that was the statement. But anyway, the point is
The sentiments there.
Yeah, this whole issue of worldviews.
Yeah.
Maybe we should do another time, because we do this in Sapiens. So we teach this in a No Doubt course. We teach this in, I think, in the Awakening Truth to Win, the Tao course. Because if you have the correct understanding of what a deen means,
Is it in Londonia as well? I think it is.
I'm
in
not
terms of worldviews.
Yeah, it is, but I don't know the unpacking. I'm not sure.
We should do that.
But it's also summarized in Fahd Tassim's book, No Doubt, which can be downloaded for free. And he's got another course that he's developing, and we have the Essentials program, which Imran Hussein is doing a course on Godless worldview. So if you unpack a worldview this way, it really, and you understand Islam as the correct lens, as the correct worldview that makes you understand reality as it is, then when you have these kind of like sound bites, love is love, my body, my choice, as long as I don't harm anyone, then it's okay for me to do it, and so on and so forth, you'll understand them from a worldview paradigm, and you don't just consume them, you get affected by them and thinking that you now have to tailor Islam to those narratives. You become more brave, and you become more nuanced, and you can unpack some of these worldview assumptions. So maybe we could do another session one day on that.
Absolutely. Jazakallah khair for your time. And what I'm going to do is, in the description, I'm going to put a link to Hamza's book, The Divine Reality, in which consciousness, which we discussed, is going to be there. The design argument, which we discussed, is going to be there. The moral argument, which we discussed, is going to be there. And in fact, it's one of those books, Hamza, that, when people say, "Oh, what shall I read?" I just tell them to go there.
Yeah.
Because it's like, go back to the basics, go back to the essentials. Because if you truly understand, and what I love about that, it goes into the love of God, right? Worship. If you follow through with that trajectory, everything else is solved. I honestly believe if somebody follows that path, and then especially if you focus on the worship element after deconstructing all these falsehoods, then you are ready for the world. It's not like, okay, let's do an updated version because a new scientific theory came out.
Yeah.
You're ready in a particular way.
It's structured that way. But the second edition is coming out hopefully by December this year. So it will be just slightly upgraded, and then maybe, because it's almost 10 years since I wrote the book.
Oh my God.
2016 it will publish. 2025 now, bro.
Time's
It's
flying.
not, yeah, so hopefully it'll be ready by 2026, maybe early 2026. Should be finished by the end of this year. We'll have a second edition and leave it for another 10 years. Because with non-fiction books, you should always update it every so often. So we'll have that, and we have the new book coming out, The Way of Love. We have your new book called, what's it called?
The Death of Neo-Darwinism.
Yep, that should be coming out very soon as well, before Ramadan.